Hello, and good morning. Welcome to another episode of Hard Lens Media. My name is Kit Cabello. I am joined here today with Daniel Lupker, Luis, and Paul DuPont, the return of Paul DuPont. He is joining us here today. We've got a lot of great topics to cover, such as Our Revolution, Illinois, getting the endorsing Senator Daniel Biss. We have the stock market crashing at 665 points. We have the tax cut draining the Treasury. We also have cannabis legalization, as well as police corruption. So, that being said, let's get started on our very first story, and that is the Our Revolution, Illinois endorsement of Senator Daniel Biss. Now, this week, there's been a lot of movement in regards to the Democrats, which one of the 5 or 6 Democratic challengers will get the nomination. And the Our Revolution Illinois endorsement is a pretty big deal. And Senator Daniel Biss definitely came out as the winner due to the fact that Our Revolution Illinois did a whole survey to all of its 250,000 members here in this state. And this is a pretty significant win. About 65% of the members of Our Revolution Illinois voted for Senator Daniel Biss to get the endorsement. Now, as we all know, Our Revolution was the group that came out after the 2016 presidential election cycle, to where people wanted to reform the Democratic Party after the disaster of the Hillary Clinton campaign and its inability to really reach out to progressives or independent voters. And this is a huge shot in the arm for Senator Daniel Biss, because now he is his poll numbers has increased to where now he's second, like right behind J.B. Pritzker, and J.B. Pritzker and Chris Kennedy have actually lost support. So they're losing numbers, and Senator Daniel Biss is gaining numbers. He's getting more popularity. He's getting more endorsements, and this Our Revolution Illinois endorsement is a significant win for him. Daniel, do you have anything you want to comment in regards to this?
So what was interesting about this is that Biss has had, it was what I said earlier on, way earlier in the campaign. I always said this looks very much like the breakdown that the Hillary and Bernie campaigns worked out to, and that the question's going to be, does Daniel Biss get that same boost that Sanders got near the mid-end of the campaign, and does that boost do better than what happened with Sanders? And that still remains to be seen. We're going to see whether or not that's going to be the case. But he has pulled ahead of Kennedy. The other 2 people that I was originally thinking that would be Theo Hardeman and Daber would be very strong competition, or relatively strong competition for Biss, taking some of his audience. They're not really getting any traction. It really does look like it's come down to Kennedy, Pritzker, and Biss, and Kennedy is slipping every single day, it seems. Yeah. Whereas, again, Biss is getting major endorsements. He's gotten a few different, I believe, union endorsements recently. He's got another.
MoveOn.org endorsed him.
He's started actually spending the money he's been saving up.
Yeah.
So
with a lot of television ads, and mind you, on top of that, it's important to note that J.B. Pritzker unleashed a very tough attack ad against Daniel Biss. And what's interesting enough is Senator Daniel Biss went on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, and all over social media, basically correcting all the mistakes that was in this campaign ad that J.B. Pritzker launched out for Senator Daniel Biss.
Yeah, and what I think is going to be interesting about this is the race is now turning into a Pritzker v. Biss, and with the time we have left, I think this is the exact kind of matchup at the exact moment Daniel Biss was hoping for, because now, for one, everyone on the Democratic side, Pritzker has been a target from the start. You saw the first and last maybe televised primary debate that they had.
I think the only one really that was televised.
Yeah, everyone attacked Pritzker. Yeah. Everyone, Kennedy shot himself in the foot attacking Pritzker. Yeah. So everyone, and then Rauner, of course, keeps airing almost 24/7 on every single TV, social media, everything. That recording with Bob Blagojevich, like in the election with Hillary Clinton, when she had that similar level of corruption, she still had this very strong love and admiration from many people that she had gained over the years. Pritzker has some very strong philanthropy efforts that he's put together, but that's not the same.
That's not going to do it. And let's remember, most of Illinois is a lot different than Cook County, and J.B. Pritzker has a long way to go to convince those potential voters that he's their candidate. But Senator Daniel Biss seems to have a better ground game, not only here in Cook County, but also the possibility of getting more support in the rest of Illinois. So this is a huge win for Senator Daniel Biss. We only got a few weeks left until the March 20th primaries, and then we'll find out basically which one of the 6 Democratic primary challengers will get the nomination and go forward into the general election against Governor Bruce Rauner.
I do think Pritzker has the name recognition advantage.
Yeah.
For most people who aren't kind of watching the race as it unfolds, you kind of go, well, who do you like? And the only one that they can really remember is Pritzker.
Yeah, but Daniel Biss is starting to gain ground.
And I do, I think...
to Paul's point, I think if the election was held today, it's very clear that Pritzker would win. I think there's no question on that.
I wanna kind of just chime in on that what you said. I think that the name drop, the name recognition, it is a big thing besides Cook County, where we're really I don't know how to say it, we're populated. Everybody's just right next to each other. But in the urban areas, I've been out to Rockford, nobody really knows about Biss. And there's a lot of people. So it's like, I did just recently, so I haven't seen no sign outside. Yeah, sure, in Chicago, Oak Park, Evanston, all the way, almost kind of like close to the border between Wisconsin.
In the polling that was released, that basically what they said. They said that Biss has the suburbs. I think he has them over Pritzker, but he has nothing in rural Illinois.
Correct. Yeah. That's kind of what I was trying to say, besides just our suburbs, or within probably 2 hours away from here. But once you go a little farther than to central, maybe deeper into that country, Pritzker is just known for contributing to to everything. So it's like, it's definitely in there.
Well, we'll definitely cover more of this story, but now let's push on to another event that's going to probably affect us all, and that's basically the Dow Jones plummeting 550 to 600 points. Daniel, why don't you inform our audience exactly what's going on?
It actually, at the point, it dropped by 666 points by the self. It was the 6th worst day of stocks on Wall Street in history of Wall Street. This is a major selling off point. This happened on the day that Trump in Congress with the memo Nunes put out tried to, in a sense, usurp the FBI. The market doesn't like that form of authoritarian instability. And another thing that happened that the market doesn't like is labor wages went up higher than they're supposed to go up, and they freaked out that they're getting paid more, because if you're a stockbroker, when you hear wages are going up, you say, oh no, inflation is possible. You don't think, oh, well, it's good that I'm making sure that, the rest of the economy has workers that aren't living paycheck to paycheck. You're thinking we have possible inflation. So with that, other events that have happened, there was a massive drop in trading, and we're going to see if it continues or if it stabilizes today. Or
There's
not
also
today.
Amidst a spat of poor earnings calls from the last quarter from multiple companies.
Yeah, it's a lot of things coming together. And see, here's the issue with the way the stock market is, because it's such a strong bubble right now, and it's based on it's based on a house of cards to a very large extent of the way companies are set up and how they can't just keep growing forever. And so you have a little bit of weakness because the consumer base is much weaker. We're a consumer-based economy, and no one's buying things anymore because they can't afford them. So like what Paul's saying as well, there's all these different factors coming in, and we know eventually there's going to be a crash. We just don't know what's going to cause it or when. This doesn't look like something that would do that unless it really something happens.
Yeah, it would have to snowball in a pretty major way for the stock market, for the floor to really drop out. I think the stock market is a relatively poor indicator of the economy as a whole.
Yeah.
But it can be a harbinger of things to come.
Yeah, the stock market at this point really covers only the biggest of the biggest corporations that have multinational connections. It's not the indicator it used to be.
Yeah, and plus I think we're kind of due for some sort of crash to happen. It just, things don't add up. Constantly it's been going up, and up, but eventually everything that does go up has to come down, and perhaps it's just an indicator of things to come, because there's going to be an impact, especially on our entire economy, due to the fact this recent article that's basically saying that the GOP tax cut that was recently passed is draining the Treasury even faster than expected. So when the tax cut was passed, the Republicans, were calling it fiscal responsibility, and that this is finally the chance for our economy to truly grow. But because of this tax cut, it's going to add more to the deficit. And now, basically, what's happening is that it's this trickle-down economic system that we have is draining the Treasury perhaps more than critics expected would happen. So, guys, what are your initial thoughts on the fact that this impact on the Treasury?
What a surprise! It was worse than expected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the thing is, the number of tax cuts, especially for the large corporations that have basically gotten away with this ability to not pay their taxes, that burden then comes on to us, and the average American worker is now working 2 to 3 jobs with very little benefits, low wages. It's we can't fill in that hole, and as long as the corporations, these large multi-billion-dollar corporations, are not paying their fair share, it's going to impact us. And on top of that, if the Treasury is drained, what does that do to our social programs that a lot of people use, such as Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security? What are the consequences and repercussions to those programs if our Treasury?
Well, they are trying to privatize those, so
yeah, privatization always works well.
Yeah.
Well, here's another thing we have to remember. If there is an impact on our Treasury and we can't pay our debts, and our deficits continue to rise, it's going to not only hurt our economy, but it's going to hurt our international image towards our allies. A lot of people always look to the United States as being the global economic superpower. We're the nation that's always leading in everything. And if we have an economic collapse, if our Treasury is gone, what will that do to the stock markets? What will that do to the various states that need perhaps more resources in regards to funding, such as some of the southern states that are really affected, due to the lack of resources? So it's a long-term consequence.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that if you're someone that would generally, I guess, watch Fox News and be in that bubble that says Trump is right no matter what, you would never hear about this. Or if it did, it would be some Democrat's fault for some reason. And if you're the Democrats, well, thanks for not having a spine. You helped us get into this mess. I mean, this entire thing. I mean, again, I would say just to my original response, who would have thunk that the GOP tax bill that was forced through the way that it does, almost like they're trying to hide something with thousands of pages of documents for the bill that everyone was given 12 hours to read. Yeah. Who would have thunk that had things that were scribbled in the margins that were cut off because of photocopiers? Who would have thought that bill would cost more money than they anticipated? Who would have thought?
If this thing does collapse and there's, a lot of people are hurting because of the policies that this tax cut that the Republicans passed is being implemented, I think a lot of people are going to ask their representatiers and senators, did you really read this bill or not? And probably the answer is no, because a lot of them admitted that they didn't read the bill.
Well, of course they didn't. Yeah. They're not read bills anymore. That's not their job.
This is just one of those things also that's just like when you hear someone who is campaigning on a platform of fiscal conservatism, you need to look at that with an extremely skeptical eye, because every time they get the ability to, they run the deficit up by another $1.5 trillion. But when the conversation is like, oh, we want to have education for people and free college tuition, we want to have single-payer Medicare, we can't afford those things. No. But we need to give Trump an extra $80 billion in war spending.
They're fiscal conservatives unless they're in power. They're for states' rights unless they're in power. It's like all these things. They like the small guy unless they're the big guy. It's really weird. It just kind of works out that way.
Well, it's just a rhetorical thing that they use the campaign on, and it's just... it's sort of the epitome of political hypocrisy to me.
And here's another thing too. Because of this tax cut, a lot of people are going to want to get involved politically, because there's another story. Because this leads perfectly into elections. And for example, in the state of Pennsylvania, there is a case of gerrymandering that's happening there, and we posted this on the Harlan's Media Facebook page.
Yeah, we covered that.
So let's actually hear more about what's actually happening in Pennsylvania.
The state of Pennsylvania is gerrymandered. Many more Democrats are there to vote, but Republicans control very high majority, I think maybe like 60 to 75% of the seats through gerrymandering. And a Supreme Court judge of Pennsylvania had just ruled that the gerrymandering that was done was completely unconstitutional, and they had to immediately rewrite the districts. And the head Republican just said, no, I'm not going to do that. So
didn't he demand that they turn over some of the data that they had collected as well?
They had data that they're not turning over, but to the bigger picture, they're refusing to ungerrymander the district. I mean, the data is a big part of it. So here's the issue now we're running at. We now have Republicans or just government officials, to be more broad, that are openly ignoring the courts. So now the question is the court going to just let its power kind of melt away, or are they going to hold this guy in contempt of court? So that's going to be a big deal. And if they hold them in contempt of court, well, the police and the people that would do that ostensibly are under the executive branch. So are they going to listen to the court themselves? And if they don't, then does the federal government get involved under Trump and force Republicans to lose seats? So it's going to be very interesting to see how far this goes, or if they relent and decide, hey, maybe I shouldn't start a constitutional crisis. Maybe we should follow the rule of law, which is such an important thing.
All right,
It's a tough one because where does the responsibility ultimately lie? Does it lie in the court to say this is not done properly, or does it lie with Congress to do the job that they're supposed to do?
Well,
and when they're not, it's a conundrum, and it could end that way, the way you described.
Well, court precedent in this case is definitely on the side of the courts being able to do this. So they have historically been given multiple times this ability. The courts have been kind of waffly on determining whether something is gerrymandered or not, but when they see something as being gerrymandered and they act, things get done. Like you just had the redistricting that was in, what was it, North Carolina?
It was West Virginia.
It was West Virginia.
We call that. That was
was something that was very recent where the same thing happened.
No, that is funny that you said that. They actually quoted that, one of those cases, that specifically to how they go on to map it out and break it down. How is one house, then they'll go talk to the next district. Hey, do you want that house or do you want the odd numbers? And they'll start collecting that block. So it's literally just like drawing it out with the map. Okay, yeah, you can have them, you can have them, you can have them.
Yeah.
But based on your like registry where you've been registered to before, they kind of it's almost like an algorithm to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that case, it was much clearer because you had on tape in session them going, yeah, we're writing this to make sure we gerrymander the district.
Yeah.
Everyone, you hear that? We're gerrymandering the district. Please don't use this against us. And it was used against them. But in this case, it's going to be interesting because it's the Supreme Court saying it. It's one thing if they decided, okay, well, we don't like this, we're going to appeal it to the Supreme Court. But they're literally saying we don't care what the court has to say.
Yeah.
Just keep it on the hush-hush.
That's a problem.
Exactly. So, moving on to another story. This is something that I really like a lot. It's pretty incredible. Apparently, in the city of San Francisco, they're going to apply the state's new cannabis legalization law to past cases, and it's a move that will wipe thousands of criminal convictions off the books. And I'm saying, finally, it's about time, because I think we've all know what cannabis is and really how it affects people, and really how this war on drugs has really impacted a lot of working class and minority communities. And basically the war on drugs was a way to basically target said groups and anyone who was against like the Nixon administration. It actually started way back during President Nixon's administration. And since this war on drugs, so many people have been arrested just for holding like a gram.
For holding a joint.
Yeah, or even holding a joint.
Or being near a joint.
Jeez. Sorry.
Yeah, anywhere near it. And the thing is, now that cannabis is being legalized for recreational use, a lot of these people who are in jail for holding cannabis, smoking cannabis, or
even misdemeanor charges.
Or looking at cannabis.
They're going to have those convictions wiped off. And you know what that means?
That's amazing.
The opportunity to vote again, the opportunity to get a job without being cast aside, the opportunity to return to have some normalcy in their lives,
and to now smoke marijuana legally.
Yeah, and plus
enjoy
cannabis,
their rights.
And plus, if it's legal, not only in the entire state of California, but it's a chance for them to actually not look over their shoulder as much. Now, of course, getting out of prison, there's a lot of issues, to be reacclimating into society. But it's finally one less thing they have to worry about, especially in that state.
What's interesting about this act that they've done is that in the bill passed by California, there's a subsection of it that says that you have the right to basically have your record expunged if you've been convicted of these type of crimes. What San Francisco did was they just said, we're just going to enforce that as if it's something that we're enforcing instead of something you have to fill out. And so right now they're going through all the people that they're talking about are people, I believe, that have been already let out of prison and have it on their record.
Right now, the Drug Policy Alliance estimates that at least 5,000 people have applied for cannabis convictions to be expunged since Proposition 64 was passed in the state.
But that's specifically is outside of San Francisco. San Francisco, for the most part, has already... Everyone that's left prison that has these convictions, those are the people that are automatically having this expunged. The question that they're now dealing with is, now they're going through people that are actually in prison, case by case, and saying, should this person be let out? Should this person be let out? Should they stay in?
And they're looking at cases all the way back from 1975.
That's awesome.
If I may, Chairman, you said that San Francisco was who's actually enforcing this.
They're basically removing the opt-in nature of it. So elsewhere in California, you've got to be like, yeah, but I want my record cleared.
Right.
In San Francisco, they're like, we're just going to do it for everybody.
Here, do it. You're cool. Yeah. Here, come here. All right.
Yeah.
That's nice, man.
Which the biggest benefit is for the workforce, right?
Yeah, but this is what I'm saying, though, Paul. It's, you were wrong for convicting somebody for something that's not a drug. So you know what? It should be on your will to be like, yes, you know what? We're not even going to we're just going to do it for you. And and now we're going to make it public and say we're sorry. I like that. Instead of saying, like, oh, go to court and come and fight. Oh, my God, go to expungement. Trust me. It's
something that clearly the people want to be legal, and, it makes perfect sense. And like I was saying, like the ability for people who have felonies on their record to now get a job, to vote again, that is
amazing.
It's awesome, and it's great for the city. And I think the city knows that, and I think that's a big impetus toward taking the step. Not just to be nice to, like, this is something you guys wanted, let's implement it that way, but also it's going to be a shot in the arm for the economy.
Yeah. And for budgetary reasons going on that, it seems like the average cost of an inmate in a U.S. prison is like $5 an hour. So instead of spending $5 an hour, you get these guys out, you get them working, you're now taking in tax revenue. So they flip around. These prisons aren't cheap at all. No, and we spend more on prisons than we do on schools.
Illinois knows that.
You got to enjoy the prison industrial complex and what it offers and all that other horrible stuff. So thankfully San Francisco is doing the right thing. They're stepping up to the plate and actually fighting for people to actually have an opportunity to live in this country. So now, speaking of which, let's go to another story that's dealing with police corruption. Daniel, want to take it away from here?
So we have there's really two stories that propped up this week with police corruption. Both are on our page. The Baltimore one was very troubling. If we were to do it, I want to give it 30 minutes, but this one's a good local 5-minute story. This is a task force of 6 police officers were arrested by the FBI for basically police being a gang. They were stealing money from gang members, pretending to be DEA. They were taking guns and they would resell them on the streets. This was a very long sting that the FBI was conducting. And to a lot of people, I mean, I still know people that are in the more wealthier suburbs whose opinion is, when I bring up, hey, maybe the police should have some reform and a little more responsibility and not shoot as people, they act as if I've shot their entire family. Yeah. And so it's cases like these that are like, look, you have police clearly taking advantage of their position. You have a complex where police can really do anything they want. I was saying before the show, oh, look, the town watch is back. Because in the medieval era, the town watch, you can just kind of go, you can take over, you could just go into a peasant's house and take anything you want. And that's how it was. And that's how it is with a lot of people. They still have that same mentality. Mm-hmm. And like we were talking before, actually, you learned I made a mistake when I was talking about police training. Remember I said it was 4 weeks? Yeah. My bad. It's 6 months, but it's still shorter than it takes to become a hairdresser. That still is true.
Really? So, again, how long does it take to be a hairdresser?
8 months.
Okay. 8 months.
You know what? Wow, that's amazing.
And so in this case, and again, so you have very low oversight. You have police determining when they get to use cameras. You have the word of a police officer is tantamount to God.
It's golden.
It's golden, exactly. Everyone's going to believe it. Yet we have no accountability, and they say, oh, it's a few bad apples. Well, what happens if you leave a few bad apples? You spoil the whole bunch. So in this case, you can have what otherwise would be considered, I think, good cops, but the fact they don't say anything is that they're close or whatever reason they want to give. If you stand back and say nothing while people do bad things, that just makes you an accessory. And so what we have here, and then there are a ton of cases that they've done that are going to now be more or less invalidated because of these actions. So it hurts if there was anyone they arrested that actually should have been arrested. Well, that's gone away. They've made it less safe. They continue to make people not trust them. And then cops like these that don't get caught for so long make, again, if you're a cop that says, well, I'm a good cop, I followed the law, well, these guys are giving you a terrible name and putting your life in danger. You're defending them because reasons.
Yeah, there was one case in particular where a victim went in there with, I think, $10,000. he only came out with probably like 1,500, 2,200. I can't remember the exact amount, but it goes to show you, man. And these are the people that wear the badge, and the badge, you know, me as a citizen, that I do respect the law. But when I see that, it does give me a point of view to see the next cop. Are you the one that's going to rob me?
It undermines your trust.
Yes,
right?
Thank you. Yes,
and because it's exactly what you said. Because I'm not like, well, I'm going to memorize every single cop that works in Chicago. I'm going to know their case log. I'm going to know their history. So when I see them, I can instantly point out, oh, you're a guy that saved that cat in the tree or something. It's a question of, I don't know. There's just a bunch of guys in blue suits. I don't know if this is the one that's here to rob me or save me.
Yeah, you know, and again, we need oversight over our police department, man. Because if cops are doing this, and this is one incident right here, how big is it nationwide? How deep?
Not even how big is it nationwide? Because again, we've learned that you can shoot someone as a cop and just go, I was scared, and they're like, oh, okay, well, you're good. You're good.
Or just go on to another police department that doesn't know anything about you, and that they're so cheap. Just like I think you were the one that covered this. They're so cheap, so they lowered their standards. Oh, you shot 6 people. You know what? We can't afford that salary, but we'll give you $10,000 less if you come work over here. So he has no option now. You see, this is an epidemic.
Yeah, because cops do everything they can to keep cops out of jail, because cops in jail don't do very well usually. Yeah. So it's just this very strong double standard. It's just like we were talking about with politics. It's, I am greater than you. I have the authority to investigate myself, and I find myself innocent. You have questioned my authority. Now you have resisting arrest charges. Oh, oh well, look at this. I found some drugs on you. Oh well, no, I found a gun on you. Oh well, now you have a drug possession and distribution. Oh well, you're in jail for 50 years because you couldn't afford a lawyer. Look at that. Yeah. How does it work out?
In the case like this, it speaks particularly poorly having the FBI come in and make these arrests, and not Chicago's own internal affairs division.
And, well, actually, I think it was in this case. I might be confusing it with the Baltimore case. I believe they had actually worked with internal affairs, but the internal affairs had tipped off those cops. But it might have been the Baltimore. I might be mixing this up with the Baltimore
The Intercept
story.
did a really big piece about 6 months ago about Chicago PD and internal affairs blocking a lot of, basically protecting people they knew were involved in this type of gang activity using their power.
Just so we were clear, internal affairs is another part of it's another branch of the within the police department,
right?
Supposedly.
And on that, the people that are cops usually have family members that are internal affairs.
There you go. Yeah. So hey, I got in trouble. Hey, uncle, can you not tell no one I shot someone? Sorry, I was scared. Yeah. I can see it right now. Sorry.
It's
ridiculous.
It's just another sad chapter that we have to once again follow. We're going to follow through with this story again, but this is a crisis that we all have to deal with. So now let's actually brighten up the mood a little bit with the return of Paul DuPont.
I'm back.
Yes,
here I am.
So Paul, I think a lot of our viewers and listeners really want to know where have you been? Your stories, your adventures. Come on, my friend, tell us the great adventures of Paul DuPont, because you were in a lot of different places, even in the great state of Michigan.
Even in the great state of Michigan, I've been doing some traveling. Yeah, so I spent 8 weeks out of the country, 6 weeks in Kenya, and then 2 weeks in Greece, covering different stories. Kenya is an interesting one. I went there to do a little bit of video work and cover some of the missionary activities that actually my parents do. My parents are missionaries in this sort of remote area in Kenya on the border with Uganda. It's crazy to see the advancements in a community like that. I went 5 years ago to see what they were doing, and just for context, this is an area where 25 years ago, this was a semi-nomadic people group, right? You're running around trying to find which river is flowing at any given time so that you can get water. You're not really building houses for permanent stay. And there's very little agriculture going on, constant warring with tribes. Back, 30 years ago, you had Idi Amin in power in Uganda who was arming some of the tribes that were bordering the Pokot people. And so there were just, constant gun battles and stealing of cattle back and forth. And all of a sudden, you have the installation, government takes away guns from the tribal leaders and from the communities so that they can't fight each other anymore. And you've got humanitarian groups that go in and put in wells. And all of a sudden, when you have a reliable source of water, now people can settle. Now people can begin growing maize and having some amount of agriculture and begin trading, cattle and things like that with a lot more confidence in the reliability of their lifestyle. And infant mortality rates begin to drop and things like that. So to have watched a lot of this progression, there's been so much change in this community just in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I went there. We rented a car from Nairobi, and we drove down there. There's a church and a primary school and these wells, and we were kind of helping, make some improvements and repair some of these wells and things like that. The car that we came into town on was the only motor vehicle I saw for the 2 weeks that I was there. Like, it was an anomaly. This time around, there were other vehicles. There are government trucks that are going back and forth collecting sand for road construction. A lot of the residents have motorcycles. They operate them like taxi services. They call them picky-pickies.
Oh, really? Okay.
One of the projects my parents have been working on is starting a secondary school. So this primary school has started to gain some notoriety in Kenya for being one of the best primary schools to graduate from, to the point where they're getting students that come from neighboring villages. A lot of schools in Kenya are boarding schools. And as a result of the primary school doing well, they've started a secondary school. So they've just got they call it Form 1, that's sort of the freshman year of high school. The first class just finished, and they're moving on to their sophomore year, Form 2. And so and construction of buildings is continuing to go on. And a lot of this effort is to help bring education for the people in the area, because this is basically an uneducated people group. This is sort of the first generation of children that are getting full formal education, despite the fact that it's the law of the land in Kenya to educate people. It is not necessarily commonplace everywhere, right? Yeah, legally you have to send your kids to school, but nobody's going to make you. Nobody's going to go. You're not going to get fined. You're not going to get a slap on the wrist. This is a very, very different culture where people don't want to send their too many of their children to school, because how are they going to pay for all of that? Keep the boys back so that they can herd the cattle. Don't send the girls to school because an educated girl can't be sold for bride price as much as an uneducated girl. That's just the culture that you're dealing with. Very, very patriarchal, polygamist culture. So working in conjunction with my parents, they're obviously coming at it from a religious point of view. So they work a lot with the church and do a lot of Bible teachings and things like that. And I don't share the same spirituality, so I have a lot of questions for what they do. So one of the things that gets me is, yes, you're telling people that it's not good to have multiple wives, and I agree with that. But how do you justify that biblically? Like, that's not a thing. Like, there's certainly a lot of people in the Bible who have multiple wives, and it's not exactly condemned anywhere in the Bible.
Yeah.
I guess you can convince people that it's in there, but it's not really in there.
And it's not really. I think a lot of people use the Second Testament.
The New Testament or whatever, yeah.
The New Testament as the standard rather than the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, there's a lot of polygamy.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Yeah.
So my question is, so you said it was a 5-year gap between when you went there the first time. So infrastructurally, like you said, there's a few cars. They have some motorcycles. That's new. What else was new infrastructurally?
So a few new buildings. One of the big things that was new since the last time I was there. There are 11 wells in the region, and the closest well to where the church building is had been a hand pump well. Most of the wells are hand pump, which has the drawback of not being very mechanically reliable. It requires a lot more repair when you have a hand pump well versus when you have an electrically driven centrifuge well. Those last longer. And so the main well for right near the church and the primary school has been converted into a solar centrifuge well with a water tower. So there actually are faucets there now. So people can go and turn on faucets and fill up the water that they need to take back to their homestead, which is it's awesome. That wasn't there before. The secondary school being built is new since in the last 5 years. Even the church building, when I went last time, I was sleeping I set up a tent in the church building because it was literally a cinder block building with no doors and no windows. Like holes for doors and windows, but nothing physical there. The church now has doors. It now has windows. And they have a congregation of I'd say about 300 that show up on Sundays. And that's an interesting cultural affair. You think of, church in the United States is like, If it goes over an hour, people are like, how long is this going to be? Church in Kenya is an all-day affair. It is 9 o'clock through supper time, all day.
Is there? I know 5 years really isn't a lot for like human cultural development. But was there anything different in how people were acting, things of that nature?
Yeah. So 5 years ago, you still had a lot of people who would talk about themselves as though they were warriors. People who still wore the traditional warrior garb. A lot of arguments and discussions about what should we as a tribe do with regard to punishment for such and such an action, or how do we convince, we don't want to send our children to school. There's a lot more opposition to that. And this time around, I see people that I had met 5 years ago are now talking very positively about the school, and they now are starting to see the fruits of some of their sons and daughters who have been able to go to college as a result of having good schooling, and are bringing back. So one girl in particular is going to be coming back to the region. She's studying to be a nurse, and she wants to start a clinic because there's no real hospital or clinic in the region at all. I mean, it's if you need to get to the hospital, you need to find somebody who has a motorcycle to take you there, because it would be a 5-hour walk, and if you're dying, that's not going to happen. So getting a ride is necessary.
Are there is there anyone in that community that's still holding on to the traditions, like not embracing?
Certainly, yeah. There's still conflict. There's still cultural conflict between sort of the old way that they want to honor the dead, and it's like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be touching dead bodies like that because it's not very sanitary. And then newer types of thinking and education, and the church actually is playing a huge role in sort of molding that culture into something that can be self-sustaining. And I think it's something that a lot of people are still sort of getting used to. This sort of how do you create markets that can self-sustain themselves and bring sort of prosperity and well-being into the area that is pretty desolate, all things considered. Like, it's one of the businesses that I had seen getting started. I thought it was really interesting. There's a businessman that sells reduced agave nectar for use in soaps and things like that, manufacturing. And there are agave plants in the area. So they'll collect the nectar and they'll boil them down in steel drums and then let it dry. They basically pour it over dry sand and let it harden, and then the sand sort of falls off, and they sell that to the manufacturer. It's not pulling in lots of money by American standards. I mean, they're making like $6 for a day's work split amongst however many people. But that is now an industry that they are taking part in, and it's helping them to be self-sustaining, to buy the tools necessary for repairing the wells when they break down. It's helping them to bring in additional food and bring in additional livestock into the areas to make sure that people have a good standard of living. It's crazy to see the progress this community has had over the years. It's not the focus of my work. The video is really focusing on the mission efforts that are going on there with the church and whatnot. But one of the questions that I always have is, to what degree can an outsider come in and say, hey, doing it this way might be better. Have you guys tried doing this, that, or the other? When does interfering with culture become detrimental to the society? When do the people of the area really take ownership over the direction that they want their society to go in versus becoming dependent on those that are coming and basically bringing stuff? And that's a very, very hard question, and it's weird to see sort of firsthand. Yeah, okay, we're coming in and bringing guidance, and we're helping and saying you can do things this way or that way. At what point are we beginning to create dependency, and is this not going to be able to be a self-sustaining structure? It's a very fine line that you walk between trying to go into an area and say you need to have people that are educated, you need to have people who can overcome engineering hurdles and learn about healthcare and learn about agriculture, at the same time as saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't continue to participate in some of these old traditions like female genital mutilation, or female circumcision. That's kind of not a good thing. Yeah. That's a thing you kind of want to put your foot down and say, this is not a good thing, but how do you get that culture to own that?
Yeah. So what's actually happening, I guess, on the national level for the government to try and, rebuild, or not rebuild, but build a stronger infrastructure so there could be perhaps more outreach and perhaps develop these communities that are now starting to settle down?
Kenya is a very, very different place in terms of its political structure, and there were some big things that were happening politically while I was there. There are a huge number of tribes and sub-tribes. There's 20-some very tribal country, and there are huge differences in how people live, and there's a lot of intertribal conflict. And that seeps its way into the national politics. So one thing about Kenya is, first of all, they're under a new constitution that's only a few years old. So there's a lot of argument over what is and isn't constitutional. They just had a really difficult election where there was a lot of alleged fraud on one party, but then the other party also is not squeaky clean either. And there's a lot of argument over the constitutionality of the re-election and all that. The whole Odinga and Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta election was a mess, and that the re-election was happening while I was over there. With regard to remote areas like the Pokot region, those usually get used as political props in Nairobi, and this area already has, because they've got tablet computers and a little server that they put their textbooks on that, and so here's this very remote region that has some technology that they're using to great effect. That's been propped up as a huge win for Nairobi and the central government, even though they had basically nothing to do with it. And this is one of the things that when starting a nonprofit like this, where they're starting a secondary school, you kind of have to be aware of the fact that if your school becomes successful, the government will just take it from you.
Oh.
It will they'll claim it as their own win, and
so they have the power to take it.
They'll just turn it into a public school and say, thanks for all the infrastructure and work that you've put in, but we're going to take all the credit for it. And that's a reality that, the nonprofit knows, right? They know that that's going to happen if they're successful in starting a self-sustaining school that is turning out students that are educated and are able to go on to college or university and either come back to their region and build it up or work in Nairobi. The government will take credit for that and take over the school.
Now, I think for a lot of our viewers and listeners who are hearing this, you actually sent us a podcast in which you interviewed what was
Julius Sawe.
Julius Sawe.
So he's the pastor of the church in this community of Asilong.
Right, and it's actually up on the Heartlands Media YouTube channel and Facebook page. So if anyone wants to check that out later, they can hear your interview. But why don't you just refresh our memories about the purpose of that interview? One, how did you get a chance to interview him? And just tell us a little bit of the background to that.
So Julius is living in Asilong. He's a Kenyan native who's not from the Asilong area, but his tribal native language is very similar to the Pokot, so he's able to work really well with them. I interviewed him because I wanted to he's one of the people we were working with in the region, but while I was there, a lot of this that was going on with the Odinga Kenyatta election, I thought mirrored a lot of other elections around the world, even the 2016 election here in the U.S. You've got this sort of outside candidate that's alleging fraud on the part of the incumbent, and some of this sort of populist versus incumbent fight that was happening. And I basically was asking him to shed a lot of light on, fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge. So if you look at that interview, he really succinctly puts down from a Kenyan's point of view what's going on in the political sphere. And I think what the real attitude was that, this Odinga guy is an outsider and he may have some points that things were not entirely on the up and up. But first of all, it's a very tribal culture, and tribes sort of vote along tribal lines. And because they're of the same base tribe as Kenyatta, they support Kenyatta and not Uhuru.
So it's a little Odinga. Like Democrats and Republicans, so to speak.
A little bit, yeah. But literally racial tribal guidelines.
So much more intense then.
Yeah, okay. Even more intense than that.
So there'll never be like somebody from another tribe voting for somebody else from another tribe then? Or
you have tribal alliances, right? So, votes happen on tribal lines in that way. But more than that, what most Kenyans were really concerned about was this was a re-election. They had already had this election, and then there was calls that there was impropriety in the election, and so they did a re-election, and there were still further calls of, undermining the political process. And at some point, one of Kenya's major economies is tourism. If you continue to have political unrest, if there continue to be riots and disruption of the schooling system and tourism is down. Like, this hurts the economy. We just have to resolve this. We just want this to be over. That was the general sentiment of people in Kenya was, let's just, whoever wins, doesn't matter. Just make it stop. This has to be over.
So in that case, what effects were the elections having on people? You said there's some rights. Like, can you go a little more into that? And what election improprieties were happening? Where is it? Can you go into that a little bit? And then, so you said for tourism, how big is tourism as part of their, I guess, GDP?
I don't know as a percentage of GDP, but I know it's a substantial portion of it. If you think of people going to Kenya to go on safari and things like that, that's a pretty big sector for Kenya. The election impropriety was stuff that you could easily see in the public. Things like the Constitution called for polling stations to be staffed and by advertisements in papers, and anyone could apply to be a polling staff. Well, they just didn't do that. The incumbent government staffed all the polling stations with their own people and just ignored that part of the provision. Okay, so that they didn't do that right. That's pretty obvious they didn't do that right, but still the sentiment of the country was, let's just get this over with. Who cares?
All right, so they finally had enough. They wanted to get it settled. Now, the thing is, right next door to Kenya, there was also another huge
Zimbabwe.
Political movement that happened. That was the removal of President Robert Mugabe, who's been in power for, 30-plus years in that country. At least to where you were at, what was the reaction from the people in Kenya? What was the political fallout that you saw from that coup that happened to President Robert Mugabe?
Right, so that happened just in the last few days I was in Kenya.
Right.
And I remember the general sentiment of folks was basically like, well, that was a long time coming. It's funny, the whole situation is weird because in his later years as president, he came to power in a way that a lot of the black African population of Zimbabwe really liked, and then a lot of the colonialist white Zimbabwe population was pushed out in a major way.
Yeah, because just for everyone to understand that, for a long time, Zimbabwe, similar to South Africa at the time, had a white apartheid-type government, and of course, with governments like that, it's quite clear that the minority of the population, which is usually the descendants of the white colonists, had a lot of power, and the majority of the population, which was basically all the people who lived in Zimbabwe, for many generations, had zero power. So when Mugabe came into power, a lot of people were very happy about that.
And I remember reading very recently that there had been a number of those colonists that had been killed in some, I don't know, it was a farming, something that they had.
Yeah.
And the government was just like, we're not going to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and they really messed up the farming actually after the transition because there was a farming infrastructure that was able to feed everyone, and the new government really didn't implement it properly, and there were problems there. Like this was not a rocky road, and but it's also not clear cut one way or the other. When Mugabe came out of power here just this last year, it had become clear that he just had become very established and wanted to perpetuate his own reign. And it was his wife that he had positioned as the VP and really was going to be the next president. And finally it was the military that stepped in and said,
Yeah, because he was going like what? He was 91, 92 years old. I mean,
that. He was old.
Yeah, I mean, there comes a point to where you're at that age, there's only so many new ideas that you can have. You have to step down. I mean, it's unreasonable.
And especially like people, like you said, people liked him for certain reasons. He had won the respect by how he got into power. His legacy seemed to really be keeping his base together, but everyone hated his wife.
Yeah, I think there was a couple stories out a while ago where she would be very abusive towards like the servants in her household and other like people. She
was not well liked, and when it became clear that she was positioned to be the next president and there was going to be no way around it, that sort of forced the hand of the military to say, no, we need to start a new chapter here. And it's interesting that they never felt the need to rise up in that way before. Everything kind of was going fine, but when it was that loss of power and that basically the military plays kingmaker, and that is that way in a lot of African countries, and it doesn't actually signify a major sea change in Zimbabwe's politics to me.
Well, here's hoping that at least there's some reform for Zimbabwe, and also again for the political future for Kenya too. Because man, that interview that you did, it really shed the light onto really what's happening in that country and the long-term consequences of tribal conflicts as well as political conflicts.
There's still repercussions of that election. Just this last week, there was a group that supported the opposition party. There were riots and people that were arrested for basically being politically disruptive.
Was that nationwide or was that just in the
that
capital?
that was in a place just outside Nairobi, I believe.
Okay.
And there's definitely political unrest in Kenya that is going to be persistent. And one of the things that came about that, this most recent one, is the government shut down all the media. They shut down all the news stations and everything. And I think it's like, okay, you got to keep news going. Like,
didn't the UN just order them to not do that?
Yeah. I think, and it was closed for like 3 days. I think they've started news media again. But my experience with Kenyan news media is that it's very, very surface level, and it seems very controlled.
Is it more or less shallow than Fox, MSN, CNN?
More, I think. Here's an example. So Odinga was coming back from the United States after the election, and there was all this talk of, there are going to be riots at the airport when Odinga comes back. Oh, don't go to Nairobi. Don't go to the airport. Don't riot. There's going to be riots. Look out. It's like, who did he meet with in America? Who was he talking to? Why did he go? Where was he in America? Why didn't you talk about that? What? Who does he know there that he's talking to? But riots! Look out for the riots. That's the whole story.
Well, it's a story we've heard time and time again from established media. You always got to look into the bigger picture about why is certain subjects being talked about, why it's being covered.
You know what that reminded me of?
What?
When Obama got into office and Fox News thought the most important thing to show was Bush in his helicopter going back to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hey, he was on a big helicopter ride.
They always show that, though, right? The outgoing president flying away on the helicopter.
Not the entire trip.
Yeah.
Oh, they showed the entire trip.
Instead of the inauguration, this was like a Trump empty podium to Bernie talking on to thousands of people. Type of,
Priorities.
That's interesting, though. So in your again, you had a 5-year gap. You get to see only really 2 fixed points over a short period of time. Mm-hmm. How do you see the progression of this village and the whole country? And I guess since we're talking about Zimbabwe, throw that in too.
There's 3 pretty disparate topics, but I think for Asilong and for the Pokot region, I think we're going to continue to see. There's talk of upgrading the roads there. We're going to see an increased infrastructure spending. They've gotten the attention of their governor, and I think you're going to see more attention to that village and that area being paid to by the local government, and that's going to help foster growth and help foster the people to really become self-sustaining. And that's really the end goal, is to have a community that can really have a foundation to build on. With Kenya as a whole, it's tough. They have a lot of influence from the United States. So there's a lot of military training that takes place in Kenya, and there's a lot that keeps a select group in power, to the detriment, I think, of the larger overall society. And I think part of their national identity is being so tied up in tribal identity. I view as a hindrance toward having a more egalitarian approach to governance, and that's going to be a cultural hurdle that needs to be overcome. And I don't think that it can necessarily be done politically. And I think you're going to see it stalled out political process there. And I think that's similar to what you see in a lot of African countries. With regard to Zimbabwe, there was a coup. It made some headlines, but it doesn't represent an actual sea change in the way that country is going to be run in the short-term future.
All right, man. Well, that's definitely an interesting note, Paul. We are really glad to have you back. Thank you for at least, sharing your time there in Kenya. Definitely we want to follow up, too, with your experience in Greece, but we're going to have to enter into our short break, and then we enter into the second hour of Harlan's Media. So to all our listeners, you are listening to Harlan's Media radio show on Q4 Radio. We live stream on our Facebook page, and we start on Q4 Radio every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. And so you can also listen to us on q4radio.org. That's www.qe4.org. Or if you like what we do here at Heartlands Media, we have a Patreon page. So your support, it's the main heart and backbone to what we do here. It helps us out produce more content and have more interviews and to do this show. So please support us. Check us out. And we're going to enter into our second break. So stay tuned. We'll be back in like a few short minutes. Peace, everyone. And we are back. You are listening to Heartlands Media on Q4 Radio. We are broadcasting live out of the Q4 Radio studios. Heartlands Media airs every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, live on Q4 Radio. That's 1680 a.m. Also on www.qe4.org to find out more info about Q4 Radio Studios, the Q4 Radio Station, and other Q4 Radio projects. And again, we're going to get a hang of this. Just stuff we got to get used to, folks. But you're returning into the second hour. We're glad to have Paul DuPont back. But we got a couple of interesting segments to cover in this hour. So, Lauran, we are going to give the floor to you. So let's hear what you want to share with the audience. And let's get this second hour moving.
Yeah, so I tuned in to President Trump's first State of the Union address on January 30th.
And it was huge.
Yeah, about 47.7 million people tuned in.
That sounds like the largest audience to ever watch anything ever.
I think it was.
It might have been. It might have been.
It was.
People wanted to see it. There's probably a lot of drinking games being played.
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, and it was also one of the longest, too. It clocked in like an hour, 20 minutes, and I think, it was like the third longest State of the Union address. And unfortunately, most of it was just fluff. It seemed to be kind of fear-mongering, too. He touched a little bit on DACA recipients, immigration, taxes, raising wages, unemployment. But there was so much that he was leaving out. It felt like one truth and five lies, like that kind of game. Okay. You know, you throw out a one-liner, but then there's all this this truth behind it that you're not actually exposing. You know, for instance, the unemployment rates being a 45-year low, debunked. I mean, there were so many media outlets that came out like that following day. Time, NPR, CNN, they all, so many different platforms came out and they're like, okay, we got to fact check this because it was just one lie after another. So unfortunately, a lot wasn't talked about, such as climate change, student loan debt, enforcing more support for the dreamers in this country, which we have about 800,000 at this point. And it seemed like, at least this was the reaction that I got while watching it, but it felt like President Trump was kind of bullying a lot of the Democrats in the room. And I say that because for the last year, I feel like this administration and many of the Republicans, and Democrats as well. However, this administration, it seems like they're dangling these promises, and then they come back and say, oh, we need bipartisan support. It's you guys that need to meet us in the middle. No. It's both sides that need to. And I feel like there have been a lot of extreme positions that this administration has taken, such as this this massive corporate welfare tax cut that they passed, right. That is going to increase taxes for 92% for Americans in this country, and only making the richer more rich. And I feel like that if that's what he's going to gloat about, which he did, it just seemed like he was applauding himself.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys
he actually
noticed
got
that.
close to the microphone and started applauding.
He kept applauding himself and using, innocent people that went through tragedies, using them as pawns to gain support for, a ridiculous bill or proposal that his administration wants to pass. I mean, I was personally disgusted by what I saw. And thoughts, guys?
I remember specifically when he compared, was that family that had when the Long Island family that some MS-13 member had killed their daughter, and he's like, this is like he used what was the word he said, unaccompanied minor illegal immigrant, whatever pretty much the words he used, which caught me for like, kind of what you're saying, one truth, 6 lies, and this was like 7 lies, but.
And it was what he was saying on the campaign trail,
right.
That all of the illegal immigrants flooding in from Mexico are all rapists and killers, and
I think we all got to remember.
I just got to say
fear mongering.
But the key is though that dreamers, by their very definition, can't be criminals.
And he definitely did the all lives matter kind of thing when he said that Americans are dreamers too. Okay, you're missing the entire point, and I felt like he just threw in like, oh, well, that's like an all lives matter kind of thing.
Well, I think from his point of view, he hit it right on the head for his basis point of view, because they want to say they don't matter, I don't care about them, they aren't special. Oh, you have your Black Lives Matter with your little black lives problems. Well, we have all lives matter, and in his case, oh, you have your little dreamers with your little dreamer problems. Well, all Americans are dreamers.
We can all sleep.
It undercuts.
You're missing the point.
It undercuts the entire meaning. But from his point of view, if you want to take it from a racist point of view, it's very clever. You undercut these people that are trying to get our jobs, even though
the jobs that they're trying to do is like most dreamers are creating jobs. They're creating businesses, and a lot of them are trying to contribute. When you have large tech companies like Google, YouTube, and just a few others, they're just saying even Apple saying, no, please don't deport the 800,000 dreamers. We need them to stay.
Almost all of Silicon Valley put out that letter because Silicon Valley's like, there aren't enough well-educated people in the U.S. We've done such a terrible job at training them and getting people in these fields. We need them from other countries. In America, America's always done well because it gets the brain trust of the planet, and Trump's like, nah, we don't need brain cells. We go do good without them.
Yeah, and the thing is, that's going to come back to bite us. But another thing, too, I find interesting now how you have all the media fact-checking Trump. If we look back to the primary as well as the general election, granted, there were people fact-checking Trump, but I always remember what the president of CBS was saying about Donald Trump, especially during the primary. Yeah, what he's saying is pretty bad for America, but it's very good for us because every time they put Donald Trump on the big screen, including his empty podium, it was gaining more views, more clicks on the internet, more people were talking about him, and they were promoting him because everything he was saying was so controversial. Very rarely did you hear, establishment reporters really challenging him, especially on the election trail. And now that he is in office, everyone's fact-checking him. But remember, this is a presidency that basically doesn't care about facts. I mean,
there are no rules.
Lauran, I mean, you
the government's gone rogue.
You addressed one issue that we've covered time and time again. What you mentioned was climate change, and we've covered this on Harlan's Media a few times about the real danger of these large hurricanes that are going to be forming up, droughts and everything else, and the impact it's going to leave on our country economically and socially. So the fact that he didn't put that up in the State of the Union really shows that.
He did bring up the war on energy and clean coal.
Beautiful, clean coal. The only person ever to describe coal as beautiful.
Beautiful, clean coal.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And he's not even looking out for all of the coal workers and their health care. And, in fact, 3 million people have lost their health care since Trump has taken office.
Really?
So, and coal workers included. So this whole clean coal war on energy, please, could we please just get this man impeached?
Yeah, but there's another thing, too, I want to bring up, and that's the Democrats.
They need to grow some...
For a long time, especially when Trump was put into office, you had people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer saying that they were...
going to lead with their values?
Yeah. They were going to lead with their values.
And then they abandoned the DACA... Yeah.
They were going to lead with their values. They were going to stand up to Trump. But every time Donald Trump and the GOP made a political move, what was the first thing that the Democrats did? They backed down. They cowered. They never really stepped up to the challenge. And, this really has me wondering, especially for 2018, let's say there's a new wave of progressive Democrats that are in that House. What are the establishment Democrats going to do, especially in regards to reaching out to the likes of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, because a lot of people are supporting these progressive challengers to incumbents, and they want to see something get done. They want to see people who are going to fight back.
If they don't want to be left behind, they're going to join where the direction this party's going in.
Yeah. But, I also find it interesting that there was a couple of rebuttals to Trump's
before we get to that, I have one other comment on the State of the Union itself. I thought the only real substantive policy point that Trump touched on, because most of it was sort of pandering to the base, it felt like. But in talking about reopening Guantanamo, Trump sort of indicated that it would be a return to the enhanced interrogation techniques of the Bush era, which was simultaneously, I thought, the only substantive policy point in the entire State of the Union, but also probably the most horrifying thing about the State of the Union. Like, what happened to really? Basically, what you're saying is you're going to consider anyone that you're fighting anywhere in the world for any reason to be a terrorist so that you can put them in Guantanamo and go back to your enhanced interrogation. This is not a good idea.
No, it's not. And just remember, a lot of these guys who get tortured, I mean, there's going to come a point to where if someone's going to get tortured, they're going to tell you everything you want to hear just so that you don't put them back into that little...
right, we know it's not... You don't get reliable information.
Yeah, you're not going to get reliable information. They'll tell you anything just to make it stop. And they'll tell you maybe the first couple of things that you want to know, but then if you keep on torturing them over and over again, they're just going to make lies. I mean, that's just how it happens. To stop the pain, you will say anything to stop it. And... yeah, it's going to backfire. You're going to if you move, like, let's say a special forces team into Afghanistan or Iraq based on a lie because somebody was being tortured, they're it's going to leave an impact. Right?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting how it's working out. And what I thought was interesting was, we know how Trump did his... Yeah, we know how Trump did his thing. What was interesting were the responses. There were a number of responses from the Democrats and from Bernie Sanders. You had the official Democratic response, and that response was from...
Joe Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy. Didn't help that he looked like he was drooling. And then that was just... and that's just easily avoidable. And it was very interesting. You remember how, like, right behind them, they had that car with the hood opened up? You could see. So there's another shot of it that I found that they actually have the car jacked up, so it's imperfect. Like that, there was the entire scene was completely made.
Very staged. It looked very polished. What do you think of it?
I just wanted to say one quick thing on that. The part that I found really insulting on his part was... he goes and he's like, well, the dreamers, they've grown in America, they've lived in America, all they know is America. They wouldn't know how to speak the language in their own. If they went back to their home country, they're Americans. Then let me talk to the dreamers, and he just started speaking in Spanish.
Right. Yeah.
Something I do want to touch before we move on, but just because it's one of the largest issues facing this country right now, and that's our health care. And I'm going to quote Trump here. He says, one of my biggest goals is to reduce the price of prescription drugs, fixing the injustice of high-priced medicine. Now, the problem I have with this is that he literally just nominated Alex Azar, and he's a former executive of the Eli Lilly company, and it's one of the largest drug companies in this country, to head the Department of Health and Human Services. This is problematic in many reasons because, as we know, and like I said earlier, we've already had 3 million people that have lost their health care in the last 11 months. More are about to. There was legislation that was included in the tax reform bill as well. More people are going to be losing their health care. I mean, drug prices are going to skyrocket. They're already, premiums are already high. So it's kind of a disaster and kind of cruel as well for President Trump to make remarks like that. We need affordable drugs. The FDA is approving more generic drugs. Patients with terminal illness will have the right to try experimental treatments. What is he talking about? And what is he actually doing to back this up? He also said that he wouldn't cut Medicaid, Medicare, and this new Republican bill, the Republican budget solution, proposes slashing Medicaid by $1 trillion, with a T, trillion, and cutting Medicare by $500 billion.
Well,
he's really looking out.
It just kind of reminds me of a story we
country.
covered in the first hour, how the tax cuts are basically draining our treasury, and it also leads up to the possibility of volatility in the stock market. I mean, Daniel did a coverage on it in the first hour about how the market fell 665 points. So the thing is,
I think it was 666.
Oh, that's yeah. You know what?
666, man.
An anonymous, a horrible number. I think we all know what the number 666 stands for. Mark of the beast. Say whatever you want.
I thought it was 333 times 2 in reverse.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever. The point is, if we have a drained treasury, if we have a stock market that collapses because of the fact we have a drained treasury, we have all this deficit, we have student loan debt, we have all these other things. The fact that Republicans have for years, especially the GOP and even establishment Democrats, have proposed privatizing Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, I only can imagine how many people will be unable to have access to those three important programs.
And you know what? Companies have many of their employees on Medicare, Medicaid are these multi-billion-dollar corporations like Walmart, Amazon. The list can go on. And
Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world, and yet most of his employees have to use food stamps.
AT&T, General Electric, Pfizer, and they're laying off people left and right. It's just...
But they gave them bonuses that come out to less than $1 an hour.
Yeah, right. I think it's like 4 cents.
Well, no, that's what... But when they say, we're going to give you $1,000, maybe for some of them get up to $1,000 bonus, if you map that out...
It's a wash.
That's like less than $1 a year.
Healthcare. Yeah. You might as well just never have gotten the bonus in the first place. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's pretty much what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is a good point to move on. Originally, we were scheduled to have who was it?
William Callaway.
Who's he running for? He's running for.
Basically, he's running for the Illinois 25th district against the incumbent Representative Marie Curie. Basically, at least to the most of my research, he's right now his name is being challenged on the ballot. That's a common thing we see here with a lot of challengers to incumbents. He also was one of the individuals who got the shooting of Laquan McDonald made public. That was a lot of work. He's doing a lot of community outreach, and he's trying to right now run for office. So hopefully we'll be able to at least
hopefully he's just behind some major car accident that's holding him up. Otherwise, I would hate for him to just not show up. We've love to talk to him. I know you prepared a bunch of questions for him being here. Perhaps we'll be able to do this again. I wish he could have been here right now to talk about what he's doing and hopefully get the word out on his run. But unfortunately, he is not here right now. So we're just going to jump in, Paul. I want to hear more about. We talked about being in Kenya and what you did there, but you were also in Greece.
Yes, and let's not also forget he was in the magical land of Michigan as well.
Oh yeah, the very magical land of Michigan.
So yeah, definitely, Paul. Tell us about your second adventure, or at least your time in Greece and
International Adventure Part 2.
Yeah, International Adventure Part 2.
I figured while I was on that hemisphere of the world, after I was in Kenya, I thought I would swing by Greece and get a little bit of a first-hand look at what is happening with refugees and asylum seekers who are coming from various states in North Africa and the Middle East into Europe, and particularly how some of the laws that changed in 2016 are affecting that process. So, if you don't know, 2016 you had things like the EU-Turkey deal or statement, which isn't actual legislation, but it is a sort of declaration, proclamation that came out of Germany, and then you also have the Dublin Agreement. And in conjunction, those two sort of mean that private companies are taking over the responsibility of helping people who are leaving primarily Turkey to get in predominantly to Greece and into Italy to make their way into the EU. So these private companies, primarily Frontex is a big one, are intercepting people midway and making determinations on the spot of whether they are allowed to come into the country. So a good number of people are getting turned back to Turkey. Turkey is doing a lot to minimize the number of people who are able to leave.
And this is a private company?
Several different branches from several different countries of a private company that is taking on this role of sort of being the arbiters as to who can get into the country. And another part of the Dublin Agreement that is crazy basically says you can only seek asylum in an EU member state that you arrive into the EU in. So here you've got Greece, who's coming off the heels of a major economic recession and is the primary point of entry for asylum seekers into the EU. And the law basically says if they came into Greece, they can only apply for asylum in the EU in Greece. It's like, well, okay, hang on. That super insulates any internal country. You're not going to take a boat into Germany. That doesn't happen. So it's a way of insulating those internal EU countries from having an influx of immigration. And in turn, this deal with Turkey to prevent people from leaving. So one of the things they end up doing is they destroy the boats that they make their way into Greece on, so that they don't have transportation to be able to basically smuggle people back and forth. In conjunction with that, you have a lot of volunteers on the ground who want to help have the most humane process for asylum seekers that they can have. So you've got two main detention camps, asylum-seeking camps on the island of Lesbos. You got Moria, and the name of the other one is escaping me at the moment, but Moria is kind of mostly for single people, mostly men, and the other camp is primarily for families and single mothers and people with children. So most of the children are in that camp. And they can leave the camps during the day, and it's just a place for them at night, but the main outcry from the people that are there is that the camps are over capacity, and they're over capacity, and everyone seems to know that. Anyone you talk to in Mytilene or in Greece knows that the camps are at like double capacity at the moment, and can't keep up with basic sanitation and healthcare and things like that.
If I'm correct, Greece is also dealing with its own very strong financial crisis, and are they getting assistance for being this, in a sense, this ground to take in all these asylum seekers? I mean, are they getting assistance from these interior countries, or are they just getting saddled with that by the interior countries while protecting them?
They get some assistance, but it's constantly being argued and debated about it as being an inadequate amount of assistance given the number of people that are coming in. And it's heartbreaking to see. When you go to these camps, I lined up interviews with refugees from Syria. I ended up, there are these little kind of community areas right outside the camp. I couldn't go in the camp because I wasn't recognized by the guards as someone who was official national press or whatever, so I couldn't get into the camps. But
Right.
We'll get you those IDs for next time.
Yeah, definitely get those press passes next time, buddy.
But outside the camp, I ended up sharing a bottle of wine with a bunch of Afghan refugees, and it's the context that you lose. Like I went in with a whole set of questions and a whole set of assumptions, and came out with having a lot of those assumptions shattered and a whole new slew of questions. So even just this example, I'm having some wine with these guys from Afghanistan. And it's like, well, how long have you been here in Greece? Oh, about 6 months. Okay, well, how long since you? Afghanistan is a few countries away. Like, how long have you been refugees? And they looked at me like I was crazy, and they're like, since we were babies, man. Like for the last 18 years, 15, 18 years, it's been a war zone there. We left ages ago. They've been jumping around country to country.
So it just wasn't as Greece that
Greece is just the most recent stop on their journey, because they've been a lot of them went through Syria, a lot of them went through Libya, some of them,
and that of course themselves became conflict zones,
right? And then they get forced into Turkey, and then trying to make their way to the EU, and it's just the most recent stop on that. And the other thing that I kept talking to with volunteers, a lot of the work with volunteers centers around schools and community centers for asylum seekers and refugees to have an outlet, some place to go, some place to have their children get some education, some place to have basic medical services provided by volunteer groups and things like that. And you talk to people who are organizers of these sort of community centers, and one of the things I asked almost everyone is, what does this look like 5 years from now? How does this get resolved? How do we see things smooth out to a point that's manageable for refugees and people who are migrants or immigrants? And most people kind of looked at me like I was crazy, and they're like, no, this has always been happening. This isn't a new thing. Right? Immigration into the EU from North Africa and from the Middle East didn't start in 2011, 2012. It didn't start in the early 2000s. It started 1,000+ years ago. Like, this always happens. Like, this doesn't end. We have to make processes to integrate people into culture, and there are a percentage of people who are looking for wars to end in their home country so that they can return. It's one of the big requests that they got, because there was a lot of, oh, well, let's set up schools, let's teach people Greek, we'll teach people English, we'll have classes so that they can learn to integrate into whatever society. And but most people, not most, but a lot of people said, well, we want classes in Arabic, or we want classes in Farsi. We want to teach our children our native language. We want them to have schooling that reflects the schooling that we had, because we want to go back. So there is a little bit of a split. You've got some asylum seekers who are looking to settle in a new country somewhere in the EU, and you've got some that are hopeful that they will be able to return to their country of origin. And I don't think there's homogeny in those ideas amongst
What's
refugees.
the initial reaction towards U.S. policy, especially now that we have Trump in office? What are people's thoughts on the United States?
Well, you're talking about people who, in large part, are coming from countries that are ravaged by war from multiple sides, from terrorist cells, from the United States military itself. In the case of Syria, there also interventions from other countries, particularly Libyan refugees. Libyan refugees have seen their country deteriorate from, basically all of NATO coming in and bombing huge swaths of the countryside. Libya is in a state now where there is an open slave trade happening in Libya. That's a place people are desperately trying to leave, and a lot of the people who are refugees are getting caught up in that slave trade. You talk about, well, what is their attitude toward the United States? It's similar to their attitude toward every country that has their fingers in the region. They want the U.S. out. They want other countries out. Obviously they knew I was an American, so there wasn't. I didn't see a lot of animosity directed toward me specifically. I think they realized that in a large way, United States military interventionism has less to do with the American citizen in general, and more to do with large geopolitical actors who are just sticking their fingers into regions that they don't belong in. Right? And I think that there's a lot of validity to that. We went into Iraq and Afghanistan 15+ years ago saying, well, we're going to do all these things, not even seeming like we had taken the temperature of the region and realized that you're gonna start a lot of deep-seated tribal religious warfare. You're going to open the door for a lot of that to start, and it's going to be kind of on our hands, the being the match that lit the whatever haystack, whatever that analogy is, or
not
metaphor.
to mention that we trained fighters that were still alive to fight Russians, and so we trained them in here's a giant military, fight this giant military with nothing tactics, and we're like, oh, well, they took out the Russians, let's just go in and we can do it.
Yeah. Right. It's a giant mess, but for most people, they're coming from situations of extreme trauma. There's less of a let's talk about the geopolitics of this and just a desperation toward normalcy in their own lives. Right. And the thing that I talk to a lot of volunteers and I say, well, what would you want people to know about these asylum seekers? And the thing that people repeatedly say is these are just regular people. These are not impoverished people. These are not low class people. These are doctors and lawyers and teachers. These are regular people who are going through a desperate point in their lives.
Right, and it's important to note, if we just turn back the clocks a little bit to Syria before the Civil War happened, if you look at some of the major cities, they were thriving, large cities with people who had careers. You had doctors, lawyers, you had salesmen there. You had a normal city. And then when the Civil War happened, all these people who had average jobs, similar like how we have here in Chicago, they had nowhere else to go. They didn't want to be in a war zone. They didn't want to have any part of it. So, of course, the most logical response is to leave, to get out, and hopefully someday return. So I understand what you're saying when the volunteer workers are saying, look at them like they're people, they're average people, and that's the real truth of it. My question, though, is what's the local government, especially in Greece? Like, I know there's a lot of EU political parties that are against this large wave of refugees and immigrants that are trying to escape these war zones, and I'm pretty sure a lot of those refugees are really afraid about the policies that might be implemented on them to basically force them to go back or to go to someplace else that isn't as open or understanding.
So the attitude of the locals is divided. And there's a square in the city of Mytilene on the island of Lesbos that's become relatively famous. It's a protest square. And on the first day I rolled into town, you notice there is constant police presence in the town square there, because you end up having protests from both viewpoints. There is a substantial viewpoint of we don't want immigrants coming in. They're taking our jobs. It's hurting our economy. This is another place where tourism is a huge part of their economy, and they're worried that having this influx of refugees and this political nature is going to hurt, what they see as their livelihood, but also their Grecian identity as a whole. And then you have a group of protesters, often supported by the refugees themselves, that are saying we need to have better conditions. The camps are overcrowded. We need to have adequate schooling. We need to simplify the asylum process. We need to get these private corporations out of the process of both ingesting asylum seekers and being basically barriers toward people getting asylum elsewhere in the country or in the continent. And the other thing you have a lot of locals doing is there are a lot of efforts to counter really fake news. I hate to use the term, but there's a lot of misinformation that gets passed around refugee communities about, such and such border will be open on such and such time, such and such day. And it's like, no, it's not, guys. You'll get arrested if you try to cross that border. Please don't do that.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of trying to correct that. I did take a day trip to a nearby island. So I was on Lesbos for the majority of my 2-week stay, conducting interviews in Greece, and I went to the island of Chios, which of the two general points of view and mindsets on immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, Chios falls a little bit more on the sort of nationalistic, xenophobic side of that debate. There's a lot more supporters of, let's not have refugees coming in, let's try to block them from coming into the country. But you did still have camps there, and you did still have volunteers I got to interview some volunteers actually that were there short-term from Texas, working with asylum seekers in Chios, and they seem to indicate that it's not as bad as what you hear. I did see a little bit of opposition to that, but it's not really it's not that bad. People are generally humane and wanting to find processes to make the transition either into Grecian life or the transition back to their home country as smooth and as humane as possible.
When you were there, was there anyone kind of like on the cusp of perhaps maybe leaving the refugee camp and going to perhaps a better country? Where do they have is there a way for them to get proper paperwork to leave and perhaps go forward instead of being in a refugee camp? I mean, was it at all possible?
It's possible. You hear stories of it happening. I wasn't able to follow anyone's story through toward having asylum granted. I heard a lot of stories of asylum being granted. There's a lot of confusion for refugees about the full process because it is complicated. And you hear stories about people going all the way through the process just to have someone tell them that some piece of paper that they have is wrong and take it from them. And it's like, but it was right. And people basically being thwarted from gaining asylum due to some bureaucratic thing in the middle. I know it takes a long time, and from the refugees that I was able to speak with, most of the goal is just right now, try to get through the asylum process, but in the meantime, try and make living conditions better. And a lot of them are trying to find some sort of work, part-time or otherwise, usually working with these volunteer centers and community centers, either teaching. A lot of them are working as translators. I was able to do an interview with a guy who was a Syrian refugee who speaks pretty good English and was acting as a translator for short-term doctors who were helping. People would come for, basic ailments and things like that, and he was acting as a translator for the physicians there. Which is, that's cool, and that's exactly what a lot of these people want. They want to be useful. They want to have a way to integrate and just live their life, even though they know their asylum process is going to be long and arduous. they want to be useful in the meantime. They're not going to sit around in the camps doing nothing.
Yeah, I can only imagine people that, like you're describing, like middle class people that all their lives have been doing something and producing either health for people or whatever it may be. All of a sudden, they lose their homes, they lose probably loved ones. They have to leave the life that they've known. They go to another country that they try to make that to either, like you said, either get it long enough till they can go back, or I'm done with this country, I'm going to move someplace new, having to then sit and wait. Well, I need documentation to get asylum. Oh, right, because your house is probably blowing up at some point. It's pretty hard to get that documentation. So they're just, like I said, there's stories of success, but it seems like they're just sitting in this legal limbo while their ability to do something in the world just kind of disintegrates.
And this is sort of the aftermath of the really big influx of asylum seekers they had 5 years ago. It still happens. You still have new people coming into the country every day, and you do have people who are granted asylum on a relatively regular basis. I mean, you hear about it. I didn't get to interview too many people who were close to finishing that process, but like I said before, it's never ending, right? It's been happening for thousands of years, but we are at the tail end of that massive influx, that big spike. And so this is, I feel like what I saw was very, very aftermath, very controlled. What you're able to see, there's a lot of like I said, this Frontex group tries to shield a lot of what's going on from plain view. It feels like it's been happening long enough that there are some processes in place, both trying to quell people coming into the country, but also trying to make people's lives as good as possible and as humane as possible for that period of time while they're trying to seek asylum. So it's conflicting. I see both sides of it.
Paul, what's a major takeaway that you want to tell our audience and viewers about your time over there in especially in Greece, in the refugee camps?
With respect to refugees in Greece, I think the biggest takeaway is it's not over. It may never be over. This is a thing where really the big hope should be that the central EU government begins to put policies in place to make the asylum process easier, to give people more options about where they want to resettle, and to essentially remove a major stressor on people who are already coming from incredibly traumatic situations. One of the things I went in sort of thinking, and I didn't, this is one of the things I didn't have disconfirmed, is that, indeed, these people are generally all coming from places that are war-torn, and that is, by and large, foreign military intervention, specifically the United States intervening in these countries and nation-states, that is displacing these people at a higher rate than is normal. So that much is true, and what we should really be looking for is things like the Dublin Agreement to be overturned and the EU-Turkey statement to be revisited and revised in a way that allows people who want to seek asylum in a more streamlined process, and to have more resources given to the countries that are already under major economic stress and having to deal with providing for an influx of immigration, that they have the infrastructure necessary to do that, because they're more than double beyond capacity, and they don't have the resources to provide for very innocent people.
Well, that's a very good note to end it on. Paul, we're really glad to have you back here. Real quick, can you tell us any groups where they could find them, if people want to help out those volunteer groups? Where can they find them on social media? Yeah,
so if you look at, there's a good Facebook group called Friends of Lesbos. Is a good place to start. I'll cover in detail more the individual volunteer groups that I work for. The name of them is escaping me at the moment, but I'll have up links on the Heartlands Media site for some of the various groups that I talk with, and where you can find out more information on them. Intra-Country was one of them. That's an upstart group, but they aren't really up and running yet. That's an upstart group.
All right, well, that's good to know. We're looking forward to that. And to all our viewers and listeners, especially on our Facebook live stream, or listening to us radio, or listening to us on Q4radio.org, thank you for tuning in to Heartlands Media. We're really grateful to have you guys join us. We're on Q4 Radio every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Plus, we have a mini-series on Can TV every Saturday at 7 p.m., Channel 21. So tune into that. And also, as a final note, if you like what we do, please support us on Patreon. Your support is the main heart and backbone to everything that we do here, from producing this show to doing our mini-series on Can TV to producing all of this content. So if you like what we do, check out our Patreon page and see what you can do to help us out. Other than that, peace, everyone, and let's all do what we can to build a better future.